There will be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Re a leboga, re ka nna fatshe. Order. The President has called for a joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces in terms of Section 84(2)(d) of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, read with Joint Rule 7(1)(b) to give an address on gender-based violence. If the members of the NCOP can take their seats. Please take your seats. We want to call the President. The President.
Speaker of the National Assembly, Ms. Thandi Modise, the women and the children of this great country are under siege. There is a very violent and brutal war that is underway against the women of South Africa. Last year, 2,700 women of our land and over 1,000 children died at the hands of police. Receive over 100 cases of reported rapes. This does not count the many more cases of rape and sexual assault that are not reported. Research by Statistics South Africa shows that 1 in 5 South African women older than 18 years has experienced physical violence by a partner. South Africa is one of the most unsafe places in the world to be a woman, with levels of violence that are comparable to countries that are at war. While it has its own specific causes as well as its own features, gender-based violence reflects a broader crisis of violence in our society. As one writer wrote this week, we conveniently refer to the attack on women as gender-based violence. This is just too vague. It is too euphemistic and too simplistic. We should call it what it is. It is the despicable and deplorable violent attacks by men on women, girls, and even babies. It is more appropriate to refer to it as male-perpetrated violence, close quotes. Over the past 2 weeks, we have also, Honorable Speaker, witnessed acts of violence against both South Africans and foreign nationals, a situation worsened by the circulation of fake and incendiary messages designed to sow panic amongst our people. Lawlessness is corroding the fabric of our society, and it manifests itself through violent crime, destruction of public and private property. Vehicles and trucks are destroyed and burnt on our roads and highways. Business operations are violently halted as people demand economic benefits from business deals. There are many in our country who have increasingly shown scant regard for the state, for the police, and for the rule of law. also for community and religious leaders and institutions, but also for our elders and for each other. There are many who have lost respect for the values that define our very essence as Africans: the protection of women and children, tolerance, and the accommodation of difference. We need to restore the human rights of others, a principle that so many South Africans fought for and a cause for which so many people in our country gave their lives. Regardless of where we stand across the political divide, each of us here today recognizes the reality that we are confronting a crisis, and may I add, a serious crisis of violence and intolerance. We have to act now before anger, hopelessness, and despair engulfs our country. I am today calling on all members of Parliament and all political parties gathered here to come together, to together signify the magnitude of the challenge that we face and the importance that our Parliament should attach to it. This morning, I was honored by the leaders of all political parties when we had a meeting together to discuss this challenge that our country faces. I'm able to report that there was unanimity of consensus, of deep feeling amongst all of us about our rejection of violence, particularly violence that is perpetrated against the women of our country. I'm thankful to the leaders of all our political parties for having set aside time to meet with me this morning, and we evolved a consensus on a number of issues that we now need to respond to. And I expect that all parties today will be able to speak and bring forward solutions and proposals on what we should do. Confronted with this bad situation, the women of our country are demanding that we should have a state of emergency, which perhaps will enable us to deal more effectively with this scourge. In my address to the nation 2 weeks ago, I said that I would be approaching Parliament, as I now do, to determine what emergency measures can be put in place to address this crisis more effectively. Ordinary people and civil society organizations have been waging this struggle. Many women's organizations have been fighting what I would call a rearguard battle, at times with meager resources, to stem this scourge. And for the most part, most of those women's organizations have been fighting this battle alone. Now it is time for all of us, all political parties, to place violence against women at the center of our concerns. I'm looking forward today to hearing concrete proposals from all of us who will speak on how we can tackle these challenges together. In this Parliament, there are leaders and members who are both men and women. The voices of men and women alike must be heard. I invite all of us to work together to turn this tide around. Outside of this Parliament, on the streets of our country, we have heard the demands of women that they want to be safe. We cry with the parents who have lost their daughters, the children who have lost their mothers, and the friends who have lost their classmates. We feel their pain as fathers, as mothers, and as grandparents. We affirm here what they have been saying, and they marched to Parliament in their thousands of thousands a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And they were saying unanimously with one voice, enough is enough. The people of this country now want action. Women should not have to protect themselves from men. They should feel safe and secure with us as the men. They have the right to feel safe. To enhance the safety of women, we are going to have to take a number of steps. As a matter of urgency, we need to make the necessary amendments to our laws and policies to ensure that perpetrators of gender-based violence are brought to book. We will make substantial additional funding available for a comprehensive funding package of interventions to make an immediate and lasting difference. We will also complete the implementation of the decisions that were taken at last year's Presidential Summit on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. In line with these decisions, and following consultation between government, business, traditional leaders, the media, Chapter 9 institutions, and civil society, we have developed a draft strategic plan which will be finalized shortly. But given the urgency of the situation, we have developed what we would call an emergency action plan, which will be implemented over the next 6 months. The plan strengthens existing measures and introduces new interventions in 5 principal areas. Firstly, how we should go about preventing gender-based violence. Secondly, how we should strengthen the criminal justice system. Thirdly, the steps that we should take to enhance the legal and policy framework. And fourthly, what we should do to ensure adequate care, adequate support, and healing for the victims of this violence. And fifthly, what measures we should take to improve the economic power of women in our country. This emergency action plan will be driven by an interim steering committee located in the presidency and co-chaired by government and civil society organizations. The steering committee will coordinate rapid response at national level. In this way, problems at places like police stations and courts and challenges such as availability of rape kits and delays in DNA testing can be channeled in the to the relevant authorities very quickly. As we have done with our response to HIV and AIDS, I believe that we should be able to establish appropriate structures in various levels of our government, in the offices of the Premier, in the offices of the Mayor, to work with social partners to drive and coordinate our efforts to end gender-based violence. And this, I think, is necessary. As we go throughout our country, we always hear about really disturbing stories of how, when women have been violated, they've been raped, when they go to report to police stations, they are just delayed and sent from pillar to post. And we often find that our police stations are not well kitted. They don't even have the necessary tools that are able to deal with this challenge. In implementing our prevention measures, we must recognize that violence against women is not a problem of women. It is a problem of men. Our young men and boys are daily exposed to patriarchal attitudes and practices, and are often encouraged to prove their masculinity through domination of women and through violence enforcing themselves on women. As part of our emergency response, and with a view of embarking on prevention measures, we're going to launch a mass media campaign that will target communities, public spaces, workplaces, campuses and schools, as well as recreational spaces like taverns and places like that. The focus will be on men's groups and formations, the youth at risk and offenders inside prisons as well. This will be matched with prevention education in schools. Women's rights and gender power relations will be part of life orientation in school curriculum. As part of this campaign, we are going to provide gender sensitivity training to law enforcement officials, prosecutors, magistrates, policymakers, and ensure that those who are found in breach of their responsibilities in this regard are held to account. We will undertake a mass mobilization program to train and deploy prevention activists to all our 278 municipalities across the country. They will engage in household visits and community interventions focused on changing harmful social norms. The second part of our response is to strengthen the criminal justice system. This is to ensure that justice indeed is served, perpetrators are held to account, survivors do not suffer secondary victimization, and the law acts as a deterrent. We will therefore be directing resources to improve the functioning of sexual offenses courts, the Tutuzela care centers, and the Family Violence and Child Protection and Sexual Investigation units of the South African Police Service. Funding has already been approved for the establishment of an additional 11 sexual offenses courts over the next financial year. The Department of Justice and Constitutional Development is already working on measures to clear the backlog of criminal cases for rape and other forms of gender-based violence. These measures include the establishment of special courts, hiring additional court staff, and the clearing of backlogs at forensic labs. Since the advent of democracy, we have enacted a number of laws and undertaken a number of programs to tackle gender inequality in our society, but as well as to promote human rights and to enable effective action against gender-based violence. We have a ministry in the presidency for women, youth, and persons with disabilities. We have a commission for gender equality. In this parliament, there is a portfolio committee and a select committee on women, youth, and persons with disability. Government itself has launched many, many interventions over the past decade. All these initiatives have been well-intentioned, but they have not really, if we are to be honest with ourselves, delivered the outcomes that we had hoped for. In many respects, however, these measures have fallen short of what is needed to confront the severity of the challenges that we face. We will therefore, as our third area of intervention, be proposing a range of legal and regulatory reforms to this Parliament to strengthen the response of the state to gender-based violence. We will propose to Parliament the necessary legislative changes to ensure that all crimes against women and children do attract harsher and heavier minimum sentences. We need to engage with the judiciary on the role that it can play in supporting the national effort to end gender-based violence. Abusers, rapists, and murderers must know that they will be caught and that they will face the full might and the consequences of the law for the actions that they perpetrate. We affirm our position that the state should oppose bail for suspects charged with the rape and murder of women and children, and that those who are found guilty of such crimes should not be eligible for parole. And if sentenced to a life sentence, this must just mean what it is: life in prison. This is so because for those who violate women, who rape women and murder women, what they do actually ends the lives, the normal lives of their victims. A young woman who is raped basically becomes completely disoriented. Her life almost comes to an end once that rape action has taken place. So we are saying we need to be harsher, therefore, against those who perpetrate such actions. We are going to give urgent attention to strengthening programs to rehabilitate offenders and youth that are at risk. It is also important that legislation like the Victim Support Services Bill is finalized, as it will strengthen support for gender-based violence programs and services. We call on all parliamentary committees to prioritize these areas of legislative reform and ensure that we have effective legislation in place without any delay. As part of our fourth area of intervention, the care, the support, and the healing for victims of violence, we will standardize the framework for funding civil society organizations working with survivors of gender-based violence.
And this is where we say goodbye to our SABC 3 viewers. Of course, we continue to cover the parliamentary speech by President Ramaphosa on the SABC News channel.
Healthcare providers and lay counsellors who provide care and support for victims and survivors. We will work with the private sector, concerned individuals, and other institutions to substantially increase the number of Tutuzela care centers across the country from the current 54 to 100 centers by 2025. During our visit to the OR Tambo district yesterday to launch the district development model, we found that there are only 3 such centers serving a population in the district of 1.5 million people. As part of taking initiatives to address the challenges in the district, we have decided to establish a further 5 Tutuzela centers, care centers in the district, which will be spread amongst the towns in that district. We are planning to meet with representatives of the private sector to discuss the establishment of a gender-based violence and femicide fund to increase support for survivors, including persons with disability and the LGBTIQ+ community. I will be meeting with representatives and leaders of the private sector in the next few days. I am going to be raising the setting up of this fund with them. I believe this is a worthy cause that the private sector can fund, and I will be requesting them to give money to this fund so that they can also lend a hand to our effort to bring an end to gender-based violence. Drug and alcohol abuse do tend to fuel gender-based violent pandemics. The Department of Social Development has therefore been tasked with increasing the visibility of substance abuse awareness and education and prioritizing funding for more treatment facilities. Institutions of higher learning require a particular focus. They are important sites of socialization of young people, but they are also places where sexual harassment, victimization of women, students, and rape are also rife. We're therefore going to resource the gender-based violence framework in universities and colleges, which will include the establishment of gender equity offices in these institutions. The vice chancellors of our universities have asked to meet the president and the minister to discuss violence against women on campuses. We will be having a meeting with them, together with Dr. Nzimande, to come up with initiatives that are focused on what we should do at institutions of higher learning. Women are often hostages in abusive relationships because of poverty and unemployment. Young women in particular are vulnerable to exploitation from older men with financial resources. By tackling unequal economic power dynamics, we can reduce the vulnerability of women to abuse. Government will continue to prioritize women when it comes to access to employment, to training opportunities, and procurement of services. We also call upon the private sector to do precisely the same. In other words, when there are opportunities for procurement, for establishing small and medium enterprises, we call upon them to prioritize women to get into those opportunities. Government is committed to reach its target to set aside 30% of the value of its procurement for women-owned businesses. And we would like to see this moving progressively forward, even up to 40%. The landscape of South African business would fundamentally change if the private sector made a similar commitment. We will continue to prioritize support and training for women who engage in small business and informal sector activity and call on established business to be part of this effort. All government departments will be expected to adhere to gender-responsive planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation. We are also going to improve the collection and analysis of data to monitor our gender-based violence programs. As part of this, a national gender-based violence prevalence study will be commissioned in the general population, as well as a specific survey to monitor gender-based violence in the LGBTIQ+ community. Gender-based violence is a societal problem, and as such, all sectors of society must become involved. We could, for example, harness the Youth Employment Service initiative to recruit young South Africans to boost staffing at police stations, shelters, and counseling centers. The private sector should come on board to fund and capacitate rape crisis centers at hospitals and clinics and victim support centers at our police stations. The extraordinary and immediate response that is needed to turn the tide against gender-based violence and femicide will need to be matched by a substantial and urgent reallocation of resources. Cabinet this morning resolved to direct 1.1 billion rand in additional funding in this financial year to the comprehensive response to gender-based violence. It is the government's intention that the funds appropriated for this program will be raised from within the current budget allocation and will not require any further appropriation or additional borrowing. In other words, every department that will be affected by this will be asked to mainstream precisely the funding for fighting gender-based violence, so that it is not the task of one department alone. So within the budget parameters that we have, we are going to resource this effort and make sure that there is reallocation, and Treasury will be monitoring this together with the Presidency. Honorable members, no man is born a rapist or a woman batterer or a murderer. Men and boys are being exposed to violence at a young age, some becoming victims of violence themselves. The phenomenon of absentee fathers means that boys often grow up without positive role models and positive expressions of masculinity, leaving them at the mercy of the streets and susceptible to involvement in crime and in gangs. The perpetrators of these crimes are the products of a brutalized society, a society that is still suffering the effects of centuries of dehumanization. We are now at a point where we need to break this cycle. As men, we must play an active role in the movement against gender-based violence. We must lead by example in showing women respect and decency. We must be positive role models to our sons and our daughters. When we witness acts of violence against women, we must not look away and walk away. Many years ago, South Africa was swept by a revolution in how black people thought about themselves and about their place in society. Like many others, I was involved in the Black Consciousness movement, championed by Steve Biko and others. It changed how we viewed the world as well as our place in it. No longer would we accept injustice inflicted on us because of the color of our skin. This revolution, we must admit, is incomplete, and it is still living. I believe we are living through another such revolution in terms of consciousness today. But this time it concerns the injustices under which the women of our country have long had to labor under. Protests driven by women, and particularly our young women, these past few weeks have broken this spell. Less than a decade ago, we were able to turn the tide on the AIDS pandemic around because we were able to work together. There was clear commitment from leadership, funds were mobilized, and there was solidarity right across society. We knew then that we had to respond to this pandemic of HIV/AIDS. And we put our hands together and decided that we are going to push it back. We have the same situation now, but this time we also have the means to end violence against women and children. I believe that now is the time to unite, to turn the tide around. We must realize the spirit of our Constitution. The rights of women and men alike must be protected. This time, we must act differently. We South Africans must also be different. Honorable members, Honorable Speaker, the recent public violence directed against both South Africans as well as foreign nationals exposed not only the levels of intolerance in our society, but also the extent to which so many of our people are frustrated about their social and economic conditions. In responding to these acts of violence and criminality, we must address both the intolerance that a number of our own people are displaying towards others, both foreign nationals and our own South African citizens. But we also need to deal with their own frustration that is given rise to by the economic conditions and situation that our people are exposed to. As we tackle racism and xenophobia, so too must we reinvigorate our efforts to grow our economy, an economy that should be inclusive, and build a state that is capable as well as developmental. We must deal firmly with any and all acts of criminality. Violent service delivery protests, the destruction of public facilities, cable theft, illegal electricity connections, truck hijackings, and construction site invasions disrupt essential services and put lives and livelihoods of our people at risk. And this must be brought to an end. Because all these acts, they destabilize communities, but they also inhibit, and in a number of cases, just stop economic activity. As investors flee and say they will not invest in a country that is so given to violent protest and activity. At the same time, we must attend to the concerns that our people have. We know that our people are concerned about those who have come into our country illegally and about some foreign nationals who get involved in criminal activity. We understand the concerns of local businesses struggling to compete against businesses that get involved in the importation of counterfeit goods that are sold at prices that are way below what they can match. We share their frustration that some South African employers are employing foreigners over locals to undercut wages, turning worker against worker. And this is where the real problem is, because as they employ those that they believe they can pay slave wages or much lower wages, they're essentially turning workers against workers. And that is where the confluence of violence takes place. We proceed from the principle, as does every other sovereign state, that all who live in South Africa must be legally permitted to do so. That is why government has prioritized border control and security and ensure that we tighten up regulations to deter this illegal immigration. Police and immigration officials are said to be taking bribes in return for making cases go away, for releasing impounded goods, and for issuing fraudulent documents. And those who participate in this must be dealt with very firmly. South African employers, be they in the trucking industry, in the hospitality industry, or in agriculture, must themselves obey the law. And all who operate businesses in this country must be registered and meet the requirements of the law. I'm able to say that, one of the presidents who came during the World Economic Forum met with citizens from their country. And as they listened to their own citizens who have come to our country, they listened to a lot of complaints and the concerns that they have that they are now no longer being allowed to do business. This president asked their citizens who have come here, they said, can you imagine a situation where the people of this country, a number of them would go to our country, and I will not name the country, they go to our country and start operating and not obey the laws? How would that grab you? They all looked down and said, it would not make us happy, which proved the point that we are putting forward. We should consider, as many other countries have, regulations that will regulate how people from other nations can own businesses, can participate in certain types of businesses within the small and medium enterprise center. One of the issues raised quite genuinely by communities is the proliferation of drug trafficking in various localities in urban and rural areas. Both South Africans and foreign nationals are involved in this. It is not only people from other countries, even our own people. And in fact, the majority of people who are involved in this are themselves South Africans. But we should also acknowledge that there are certain parts of our country where we need to have specific focus around this issue. This needs to be dealt with as a law enforcement matter, irrespective of the nationality, whether you are South African or not. The illegal actions of a few must not lead us to turn on all foreign nationals or on foreign nationals, the majority of whom are decent and law-abiding. And we have had a lot of interactions with the diaspora forums, the number of diaspora forums that we have had engagements with. And many of them have said, we have come here to settle and to settle legally. We love this country and we are law-abiding citizens. And we need to give recognition to that. Our fortunes are linked to those of our fellow Africans. This country was built on the labor of not just South Africans, but migrants from India, from China, and from the entire Southern African region. We are a diverse, multicultural society that draws on the rich experiences and the capabilities of people from across the continent and across the world. This makes us a better and much more tolerant and prosperous nation. Rather than retreating into a lagger, we must embrace African integration and the benefits that it will bring to our own economy and those of our neighbors. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement will fundamentally shape the economies of our continent, and we need to be prepared to take advantage as South Africans of the opportunities that this agreement is going to create for us. We are the most industrialized nation on the continent, and by dint of that, we are the ones who will most benefit from the free Africa trade. As we integrate with others, as we cooperate with them, as we allow them to come and set up businesses here, and as we also go out into their own countries to set up businesses to sell our goods and services. This week, I dispatched envoys to a number of African countries to discuss concerns that have been raised by the reports of their citizens that are being attacked. The message they conveyed to the African leaders that they have met have been well received. Earlier today, I spoke to former Minister Jeff Radebe, who told me that he was well received by President Muhammad Buhari, who expressed great support for the efforts that we are taking to deal with this matter. But he also confirmed, as he and I had agreed, that yes, he will definitely be coming to South Africa for a state visit, notwithstanding what has happened. And I really appreciated that. And earlier today, following the decision by our cabinet to set up a fact-finding mission to come and find out precisely the situation that has engulfed our country, and also to be able to get that fact-finding mission to interact with the African Union, precisely with the Peace Security Committee of the African Union. Today at midday, I spoke to former President Jakaya Kikwete of Tanzania to ask him to head this fact-finding mission and come to South Africa and to work together with former President Joaquim Chissano of Mozambique. They have accepted the request, and we would like to have them in our country to conduct a fact-finding mission so that the truth of what has happened here can also be told to the entire African continent. They accepted this mission and said, we cannot say no to you, President, and we cannot say no to South Africa. We want to be here to support the efforts that you are meant to make to move your country forward and the continent forward. They would then make recommendations on the measures that we can take to prevent such incidents in the future. We are going to work with local and international humanitarian organizations, as well as various diaspora forums, on an initiative to tackle intolerance and xenophobia. Such a campaign must be aimed at eradicating stereotypes, encouraging cross-cultural understanding, and promoting social cohesion between us as South Africans, as well as those who have come to our country from other countries. There is no place for xenophobia in South Africa, and in fact, we can say that South Africans are not xenophobic. South Africans do not hate nationals from other countries, and nor is there any place for criminality, whether it is committed by foreigners or by our own citizens. From history, we know that there is a fine line between turning on foreigners and turning on each other. We have all heard the story of a Shangaan man from Limpopo who was attacked in last week's violence because when he was asked, he was unable to pronounce the word elbow in isiZulu. And that led to him being attacked. And we cannot tolerate this. Now, when I addressed the problem with all this is where the problem is. Once we show any form of intolerance against certain people, we begin, as I said, to show it against ourselves. When I addressed in Ekurhuleni a huge crowd of people, I started addressing them in Shangaan. As I addressed them in Shangaan, there was a group of people who responded almost very aggressively against my utilization or my speaking in Shangaan. And then I also addressed them in my own language, Venda. I also experienced precisely that. Now that immediately showed me that as we show intolerance towards those from other countries, it begins to mutate and begin to manifest itself in tribalism amongst ourselves. And then I asked them, I said, if you are responding in this way, and you are saying that Shangans must go away from here, and vendors must go away from here, you will also be saying the Pedis must leave, the Tswanas must leave, the Sothos must leave, the Xhosas must leave, and who will you then be left with? Because in no time it will also be said, yes, everyone must then go back to what apartheid defined as our enclaves. And I said we cannot and will never accept that form of tribalism. I said that form of tribalism was actually destroyed by our forebears, who, when they formed the African National Congress in 1912, said we must kill and destroy the demon of tribalism. And we will continue to do precisely that. We will never accept tribalism in South Africa. This South Africa, I told those colleagues and compatriots, I said this country belongs to all of us. Here in Ekurhuleni, anybody can come and live just as much as anybody can come and live here in Cape Town. Just as anybody can go and live in Durban. We, as South Africans, are free to go and live anywhere. And therefore, we need to demonstrate our diversity, our unity as one nation. We will not allow this country to be sucked into a maelstrom of primitive nationalism and tribalism. We will act courageously and actively resist with all our might and our being any attempts that seek to divide us as Africans from each other. We must devote the same energy to eradicating lawlessness in all its forms. In this regard, we must join and support our community policing forums. The ward committees and local structures of our political parties must also step up and do their part in making our communities safer. Everyone must see to it that their duty is to speak against crime and to report misdeeds. Criminals must have nowhere to hide. In my meeting with the leaders this morning, one of the leaders, and it was Honorable Groenewald, said, President, the point right now in this country is that criminals are not afraid of the law. They are not afraid of the police. We must now collectively as this parliament make sure that we strengthen the criminal justice system and that criminals must be afraid of the police. They must know that the police will act against them if they do not act in accordance with the law. And communities must support initiatives to reintegrate foreign nationals. There is this wonderful example of the way in which at the hostels, hostel indunas and community members in GP's town were able to talk to each other and find a way to reopen GP Park Primary School following a week of violence. We want to see more of this dialogue. Our nation, I believe, is at the crossroads. Our actions now will determine whether we rise or we sink into the abyss. But I know that none of us sitting here wants to sink into any abyss. Therefore, we are then called upon to rise so that we do not sink into the abyss. Violence against women is not a problem of one province, or one community, or one political party. It does not wear a green and yellow duke, a smart suit, or a red uniform. I call upon this parliament to consider those with other emergency measures without any form of delay, so that all government departments, agencies, and civil society formations can begin with the implementation. I call upon all the citizens of our country to extend a hand of friendship to the immigrant community who just want to make a better life for themselves and their families in our country. Many of them have fled war and persecution in their own countries and see South Africa as a safe place for them and their children. Let us show them the spirit of Ubuntu and show empathy for their situation. At the same time, we need to continue to work through the African Union to strengthen democracy and good governance across the continent and silence the guns of war and conflict. We must remove the cancers of gender-based violence and xenophobia so that we can hold our heads high up among the community of nations. I believe that the time to talk is over. We now need to get down to action. It is time to restore the hope and the faith of our people. Working together, we can turn this moment of crisis into a moment of opportunity to renew ourselves and return to the values of respect for the rule of law and of human rights for all. And working together, we can be a nation at peace with itself and with our neighbors. We can be a nation that confronts its challenges, and challenges we have in great number. But we can also be a nation that decides that we are going to confront these challenges and turn these challenges into opportunities. And working together, we can indeed heal our nation and unite our people. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Speaker.
Honorable Shivambo, are you on a point of order?
Yes.
What's your point of order?
So earlier today, I called the Secretary of Parliament to ask him specifically, an hour before the sitting of this House, what is the purpose of this sitting? And then he sent me a letter from the President, which was sent on the 12th of September, which said that in light of the issues of gender-based violence, the President has used Section 84(2)(d) of the Constitution to convene this joint sitting to discuss gender-based violence. The other paper says we're going to discuss gender-based violence. But it looks like now the framework has been expanded to then discuss other issues. There's nothing wrong with it. But in terms of parliamentary process, there has to be prior notice of what is the sitting all about, so that we prepare ourselves adequately as the whippery, as whips of different political parties. The other paper says something else, and what seems to be discussion now is something else different. Please address that.
Thank you, Mr. Shivambo. Honorable members, order. 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 Honorable members, I don't think that the issue that is on the order paper was not addressed. I think it was addressed. And I think that we should respect the pain that this country is going through by continuing with this debate. I now call...
On a point of order.
What is your point of order, Ntate Malem?
Honorable Speaker,
Yes, sir.
we have to be very professional, especially at this level.
Yes.
We do not disagree with what the President has said. And we are saying you should note the incompetence we have been subjected to here. Because coming here, we ought to prepare, we ought to make research about issues that the President is going to speak about. And if President has got 2 issues to address, those matters should be brought to us in advance because we prepare. We don't just wake up and get into buses and come here. So
Your point is taken, Mr. Malema.
all we are saying is that, Speaker, in future, please get your office in order. That's what we're saying. We're not saying there is no issue of agency which the President has raised here. And don't create an impression that we do not take the issues the President raised is very serious. We take them very serious. That's why we want to be told in advance to prepare thoroughly so that we speak to facts. We don't just come here and waffle.
Thank you. Honorable members, order. Honorable members, the item on the agenda is the item that we called the joint sitting for on behalf of the President. The fact that the issues of xenophobia were addressed, I take note if that is the issue that has been raised. Honorable members, you are at liberty in your debates not to address those issues if you want a specific debate on xenophobia. But the majority of the address was pitched towards dealing the item on the agenda. Can we proceed? And as we proceed, I invite the Honorable, the Deputy Chairperson of the NCOP.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Achtbare President, my opa komt van Koffingwabe af. En toen hij daar in die Boesmanland in Kennard kom, toen kan hij niet zeggen 88 nie. Now this elbow story make me think of my grandfather, because 88 was the difference between him and starvation, because hij tegen pay as hij kan zeggen 88, hij zei 88. I was really just reminded of when we grew up, how apartheid also discriminated against our people for not being able to say 88. Word I meis with our people. The Speaker of the National Assembly, Chairperson of the NCOP, the President of the Republic of South Africa, members of the National Assembly, permanent and other delegates of the NCOP, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable President, a national emergency calls for a national emergency response. And really, for us as Parliament, we are really very much honored to participate in this debate. 2019 marks 65 years since the adoption of the 1954 Women's Charter and 25 years since the adoption of the 1994 Women's Charter for Effective Equality. By its very nature, the Women's Charter depicts key milestones in history of women's activism, women's struggles, and the united fight by women against all forms of oppression and discrimination. 65 years to date, women have demonstrated a collective resilience to unite across race and political doctrines in order to fight against patriarchy and discriminatory laws and practices. This unity of purpose culminated in the adoption of the 1954 and 1994 charters respectively, with both charters serving as the backdrop to the development of a comprehensive policy and legislative regime. Women have continued to make remarkable strides through the advancement and adoption of a broad continuum of policy, legislative and systemic advances. Despite the notable advances that have been made towards the advancement of the women's rights regime, the struggle terrain for women has shifted significantly to intensify a new set of challenges. Today, women face the onslaught of an oppressor with a different face and a different mandate. Whereas 65 years ago, the iron grip of the oppressor manifested through the apartheid regime and its repressive laws, today, the face of the oppressor is patriarchy and violence, which is meted out in our homes, in our streets, and in our communities Today, the oppressor is not only the societal culture that has entrenched violence against women by the men they live with. It's a culture of oppression that is further given expression and intensified through toxic forms of masculinity, which aggressively deny women the right to exercise autonomy over their bodies. The mutilated bodies of our mothers, our sisters, and our daughters vividly demonstrate the disturbing levels of violence at the hands of an oppressor who is determined to subdue women and deny them their constitutional rights. Whereas 65 years ago, a revolution was sparked by women to fight all forms of discrimination, particularly as they pertain to restricted movement. Ironically, today still, the struggle against freedom of movement still persists because women and our girl children live in fear. They are terrorized in their homes, brutally attacked in public spaces, and savagely killed in the most unsuspecting places. For God's sake, Winene was killed in a post office. This brutal onslaught seeks to keep women bound, restricted, and relegated to the fringes of society, as if they have no place of belonging. The movement of women today is still restricted. Honorable President, Honorable Speaker, this joint sitting is taking place at a time after Parliament have hosted its first Women Parliament of the 6th dispensation. Given the recent spate and escalation of gender-based violence and femicide in this country, it is no coincidence that the 2019 Women's Parliament was convened to decisively respond to this matter of national importance. Our Parliament, as women in the very same chambers, was convened under the overarching theme, a 25-year review of the Women's Charter for Effective Equality, with the sub-theme being gender and institutionalism towards strengthening the national gender machinery as a response to addressing gender-based violence in South Africa. Honourable members, the Women's Parliament took place within the contextual framework of assessing the progress made on giving effect to the Women's Charter for Effective Equality, which was adopted in 1994. Furthermore, set against this backdrop, the Women's Parliament discussions focus on strengthening the national gender machinery through engagement with women across the spheres of government. We had ministers, we had deputy ministers, still had the Honourable Bavelile, may her soul rest in peace, MECs, MPs, MPLs, and councillors, civil society organizations, all political parties represented in Parliament, the progressive women's movement, ordinary South African women that we engage with members of the public on resourcing of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. Honourable President, Honourable Speaker, the national gender machinery was discussed to give input into policy and programs for women's empowerment and gender equality, as well as hold government accountable in this regard. To this end, the national gender machinery is a key stakeholder in the fight against gender-based violence, both as it relates to creating awareness and advocacy and in holding government service provision and resourcing for gender-based violence to account. However, despite this important mandate, structures of the national gender machinery continue to experience challenges which hamper its effectiveness. It is important to emphasize that in order for the machinery to make an impact in addressing gender-based violence, the challenges and the weaknesses of the national gender machinery need to be addressed. Key challenges experienced by the national gender machinery which require review and intervention include the following: a lack of coordination and synergy in terms of planning and programming between the various structures, a lack of coordination between the structures, a received overlap in terms of the mandates of the various structures, a lack of authority in terms of the placement and powers vested in the structure, particularly in relation to the gender focal points. Furthermore, some of the structures do not have the requisite financial and human capacity for them to be able to carry out their mandates. The Women's Parliament further reiterated the importance of addressing these anomalies that continue to hamper the effective functioning of the national gender machinery, which impedes concerted responses to end gender-based violence and femicide. The issues that emerge in relation to the resourcing of the NSP GBV, participants at the Women's Parliament also noted that the extent of gender-based violence has become a national crisis, and it needs a response that demonstrates our collective commitment to respond to it. That is why, President, we are saying we appreciate today's response, because it is a situation that needs an urgent response. They express the need for us to develop a culture of consent where men should understand that no indeed means no. Participants also express that gender-based violence is so widespread, it can be described as being a physical and psychological warfare waged on women and LGBTIQ plus persons and our children. It has a negative impact on everyone in society, and it must be addressed at all levels. The action areas that was focused on, the Women's Parliament noted the following key action areas in relation to strengthening the resourcing of gender-based violence. That is legislation and policy. While there is appreciation that we seem to have the requisite legislation and policy framework in place, the review of existing legislation dealing with gender-based violence would assist in identifying possible policy and legislative gaps. The Women's Parliament also strongly echoed the fact that the legislative sector should play a decisive and active role in ensuring that the existing legislation is being implemented. We also need to have specific legislation and policy areas that respond to the issues of femicide, but also political accountability. There is a need to find appropriate mechanisms to ensure accountability. At the parliamentary level, this could potentially include the creation of a specific oversight committee on issues of gender-based violence. Oversight in relation to gender-based violence at Parliament must be more targeted and coordinated. Parliament should consider developing an intersectoral oversight plan in this regard. We need to link service delivery to government budgets. Parliament needs to improve upon its mechanisms for engaging in gender-responsive budgeting by ensuring that government is held accountable in providing services and in integrating gender-based violence into budgets and ensuring that it is linked to planning, monitoring, and evaluation initiatives. Budgets need to be ring-fenced for gender-based violence. Through its oversight initiatives, Parliament should also interrogate government budgets and advocate for the ring-fencing of the available budgets allocated to gender-based violence. Ideally, government should look at creating a basket fund, pulling in a range of funds from different sources to support specific pillars of the National Strategic Plan. I just want to repeat, President, this was discussions in the Women's Parliament that took place on the 28th of August here in the chambers. We should also look at the strengthening of the services provided by government on gender-based violence. In order to do this, Parliament should engage with the costing of providing services for both addressing and prevention of gender-based violence. This should be used, for example, to engage with what is being spent on services such as the provision of shelter and victim support services. Also, the resourcing of Tutuzela care centers that needs urgent attention. The violence against women and children sector remains constrained by a shortage in skilled staff. The most important of these is the sensitivity training for frontline staff in the police and medical services, and the provision of ongoing training and support services for social workers dealing with violence against women and children. Better data collection and management for violence against women and children is required so as to enable effective planning and delivery of programs and services. We are continuing with the role of the legislative sector in addressing the uprooting of gender-based violence. Honourable members, as the arm of the state that is seized with the responsibility of overseeing the implementation of policies and legislation aimed at uprooting gender-based violence, Parliament has a particularly important role to play in this fight. In order to give greater impetus to the resolutions of the 2019 Women's Parliament, the following strategic actions can be infused into Parliament's oversight processes. We must infuse a quarterly issue-based gender-based violence and femicide oversight into our committee oversight week ambit. This will provide a platform for tracking the implementation of commitments made while advancing outcome-based oversight. We must also infuse an annual gender-based violence provincial week into the NCOP program. This issue-based provincial week will allow Parliament to assess the mechanism and resources in place, such as shelters for victims, while assessing how allocated gender-based violence budgets are actually spent towards the response programs in each province. It is important to note that SALGA also has quite a number of progressive commitments to address endemic levels of gender-based violence across our districts and localities. These commitments must be synergized into the broader national response plan to gender-based violence and femicide. Further, the SANAC, the men's sector, is also currently hosting a series of men's parliaments across all districts in the country in order to deliberate on issues that relate to gender-based violence across provinces and localities. This NCOP, Gender-Based Violence Provincial Week, will also seek to strengthen partnerships with all key stakeholders so as to accelerate and give impetus to the fight to eradicate gender-based violence and femicide.
Thank you, ma. Na kwa hawe hedi le kabu madimabi.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Speaker.
Remaiman, rukupa wenara.
Honorable President, firstly, let me thank you for honoring our request for a meeting today, and we hope that it's not the last of its kind. Because I think all of us must recognize, fellow South Africans, our country and our state is busy collapsing. We have lost the rule of law as a nation. Violence against women, against children, against foreigners are becoming too often daily occurrences. And I think we must dare never deny the fact that we must all condemn xenophobic violence in the strongest terms. We must take practical actions such as ensuring that we secure our borders so that anybody who enters our country has got the appropriate documentation. And furthermore, we must ensure that we share intelligence across all sectors of government so that we can be much more effective at policing. Further, South Africans, let's ensure that we build an inclusive economy so that opportunities for men and women, citizens and non-citizens, are created in our country. Equally so, the scourge of violence against women is a dark stain in our nation. Every single day, 114 women report where they've been raped. Mr. President, I think the greatest tragedy is that no one actually gets arrested. The conviction rate is less than 5%. That's not good enough in our country. And therefore, when many of these take place, we must call it out by name. We must improve conviction. Bo Mebarona, Bo Valencia Farmer, Megan Kramer, Karabo Mukwena, Uyinene, and many others. These are victims and we should dare never forget them. I really want to say, fellow South Africans, that we must return to the rule of law as a country, and I join all the women who we stood outside here with, and we say enough is enough, genoeg is genoeg, it must end here. Sonke, we must play our part. It's not just the police, it's not just the courts, it's not just leaders, it's every single one of us. We must become better parents to our boys. We must, in fact, teach them they must treat girls and women with respect. We must show our boys with our actions we stand strong as men and say, not in our name, and we must give dignity to women in this country. Mr. President, fellow South Africans, Kenya introduced a program called No Means No in their schools. I welcome your call. We must introduce a similar program to life orientation in our classes so that we radically educate our students. We must furthermore speak out against every single injustice. We can't allow culture, tradition, religion to be a place where we can hide the committing of such crimes. We must stand up as a society. It requires all of us, honorable members, because this evil has spread everywhere. I also want to say this House has a responsibility. We must establish an ad hoc committee to investigate the systemic causes of gender-based violence and map up long-term solutions. It's our job to shape legislation in order to protect women from abuse. And right now, let's be honest, our laws are not good enough. The act that deals with domestic abuse is 20 years old and out of touch. We need to replace the Domestic Violence Act and the Protection from Harassment Act with a single piece of legislation that is better suited to this challenge. And as the DA will be introducing a gender-based violence bill by the end of this year to do exactly that. In fact, it will have language that includes all forms of abuse, and the substantive part will be written in simple, non-legal terms so that ordinary South Africans can understand it. The bill will deal with applying for and enforcing protection orders from court. It will also call for an online registration of these domestic violence court orders so that information can be accessed across cities and towns. The bill will make it possible for us to increase conviction rates for gender-based violence. It will be tabled soon enough. And we must ensure, Mr. President, that there's no substitute for good police. In our current form, the SABs are also complicit. We hear of many of these crimes. We must reform our policing, we must professionalize them, we must train them, and we must ensure that they are placed better under provincial control so that we can merge them with Metro Police and fight crime. Right now, Mr. President, 16% of police stations in our country meet the UN's police to population ratio of 1 to 220. In truth, ratio between police and citizen is already sitting at 1 to 1,090. Mr. President, now if we compare that to VIP protection, that number is 81 policemen to every 1 VIP. Surely that can't be right. We must take that money, spend it on things like rape kits, and ensure that 76% of our police stations actually have rape kits. At this point, we already spend 350 rand per day to keep an inmate in prison, but only 70 rand a day to in fact keep a woman safe in a shelter. We must get our priorities right, honorable members. What we need is more dedicated detectives. Our police officers need to be trained to deal with the trauma of victims. They need real victim-friendly rooms in order for us to do so. But beyond training of our police, we must deal decisively with the corrupt ones. The ones who are corrupt in the force, we must take them out so that they don't help in the delivery of drugs, illicit goods, and issues that put victims in danger. Finally, the Department of Justice must deliver on its promise to deliver sexual offences costs. We must do that, and this program must be accelerated. It's simply not good enough that in these courts in these areas are not there in areas that they are most needed, and they must be properly equipped. So, honorable members, I want to call upon all of us here. I agree with you, President. Time for talk is over. We must turn our good intentions into good outcomes. We need actions. Let's put aside political differences. Let's act now with the severity of the crisis in our country. Let's respect the safety of women and our girls. Let's act now.
Thank you. Honorable Mente.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The President of the EFF, the caucus of the EFF led by the DP Floyd Shivambu, the Secretary General and the DSG, fellow South Africans. Let us welcome the initiative to join both houses and respond to the phenomenon of rape, abuse, and murder of women in our country. It is important to immediately state that this triangle of suffering imposed on women of this country, black women in particular, Africans, is not new at all. The idea that it has only reached the crisis level is also not true. The problem of rape, abuse, and murder of women has been normalized crisis over many decades. This is because in the townships, in the rural areas, there has never been law enforcement. You will never ever find a law enforcement buggy in a rural area and a township. In townships, in rural areas, the police were from the beginning only trained to ensure that blacks stay where they have to stay, which is the rural and the township, and never pose risk to the white communities and its properties. Therefore, it is the law of the jungle that rules. The law of the jungle that was subjected to as women in South Africa. This has been allowed and made possible by the colonial and apartheid states and continued by the government of today. In the townships, you've been killed anytime, anywhere, by anyone with impunity because there is no law enforcement. This means the first thing we all have to admit is that if we do not build a reliable, decisive police force within black areas, we will never achieve justice for victims of gender-based violence. Police are the first to recommend that families must go back home and talk about the issues. Or when the husband has beaten a woman, even mishandled a child, you are sent back home to go talk about the issues. Talk about the issues where? When your own family has failed you. It's the system at home that fails you that you go to the police station to report. Also, the police and many conservative amongst us like to think that the resolution of the problem lies within our families. It's not true. You cannot tell women who are being abused to go and sort it out at their families. As a result, you need a psychological shift in the police and law enforcement in general that says the state has a duty to enforce the law even against the wishes of parents and partners who go and withdraw the cases because their husband feed them. The mere fact that the child is yours does not mean that you can violate or abuse them. The mere fact that the wife is yours does not mean that you can force sex or beat them. It's our vaginas. We can do what we want with them. It's our bodies. Therefore, there is no quick fix to the problem or only help a successful policing, prosecuting, tough sentencing, and working prisons will stay with the problem for as long as we do not fix this system. Mr. President, you said earlier on you need tough laws to keep people in jail. The legislation that exists is prioritizing the rights of rapists, of murderers, of child beaters, of children murderers above the victims. They get bail because they have rights, but my right is not recognized. We therefore recommend a parliamentary joint standing committee to sit each week and get the briefing of all the cases that have been reported in South Africa. We need a call center here in Parliament where women can call and report that I have a rapist in my house. We need a call center here in Parliament that's going to attend to children who are being mistreated. We need a Parliament that's going to ensure that there are shelters where police are going to refer women that go and report, not shelters at home where the family stature has already failed you. In xenophobia, which is actually Afrophobic, we are not xenophobic, but we hate Africans. We hate our brothers. Let's separate criminalism from the people. Criminals, even if they are Africans, must be sent to jail. Police must do their job to separate the criminals, which are Africans, even us South Africans, send them to jail so that we do not have a problem of South African fighting another African brother in South Africa.
On that note, thank you, ma'am. Your time has expired.
Lastly, sorry, Chair. Mr. President, can you confirm here today that in the past 25 years of this democratic dispensation, you have never laid a hand on a woman, and all men here must confirm that they have never laid hands on women? You are all a part of the problem.
Honorable Van der Merwe. Go ahead, Honourable Member.
Deputy Speaker, at the weekend, the devastated mother of a 24-year-old woman whose body was found dumped in Gugulethu said that she had hoped that her tears would not be in vain. I mention her because she was speaking to you, Mr. President, to our government, and to all of us seated in this House today. I mention her because when Anine Boyson died, when Karabo Mokoena died, and when little Courtney Peters died, we were promised that the tears of their families would not be in vain. Government pledged then that things will change. But the reality is, as we convene this urgent joint sitting today, and our nation now faces a national crime crisis, nothing has changed. Mr. President, we commend the initiative you took today and the intentions you've outlined, including the emergency action plan. You've asked for our support, and we pledge our full support and commit our focused attention to this fight. But, Mr. President, I sometimes wonder whether the state of our nation keeps you and our government up at night. I ask this because the reality is that millions of South Africans don't sleep at night because they live in fear for their lives. They live in fear for their lives because, as you've admitted at the weekend, you lead a lawless nation, a country which now resembles a war zone, where our lives mean nothing and where criminals are in charge, where women face war on our streets, at our homes, at the workplace and at schools, even at the post office. To date, the disjunction between what our women face and what our government does in response has been alarmingly inadequate. And so it is my hope that the funds that you've pledged today, Honourable President, will be made available without further delay. Honourable Speaker, let me be clear, we don't need more promises. What we need now is a government that will deliver on its promises. Beyond the rhetoric, we need action. And beyond the outrage, we need urgent change today. And so our solutions are very practical, Mr. President. We need a social worker in every community. We need to fund and expand shelter services. It cannot be that this government spends 10 rand on a woman in a shelter, but 350 rand on a man in jail. It doesn't work. We need to fund NGOs, capacitate the police force. We need to enforce the rule of law, empower the Department of Women in the Presidency. We need to hold to account departments that fail our women, starting with the Justice Department. And we need an ad hoc committee to deal with South Africa's national crime crisis here at Parliament. We need to lead a campaign of moral revival in our communities. We need to strengthen our Tutuzela care centres, Mr. President. We can't just expand them. They require services. We need rape kits at all police stations, and gender equality must be taught at school level as a start. Mr. President, we have tasked the rank and file of the IFP, every councillor, every mayor, every MP and MPL to prioritise the fight against gender-based violence. Let me also take this opportunity on behalf of the IFP to thank each and every person who took to the streets in recent weeks, united in the resolve to end this crisis. Mr. President, it is clear that arresting the economic decline, the violence, the hate, the racism and lawlessness that has besieged our nation will be the biggest test of your presidency. By announcing the interventions you've outlined today, you've shown us that you've got the courage to act. What remains to be seen is whether you and your government have got the courage to govern, the courage to do what is right, and the courage to save our nation from becoming a failed state. We stand ready to help you in this fight. I thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Groenewald.
Geachte adjunct Speaker, Honourable President, from your first State of the Nation address, I stood from this podium and I said there's a constitutional obligation on you to ensure nation building. You have just told South Africa how deeply disturbed you were on the Shangaan issue when you even wanted, or that when you spoke in your mother tongue language as Venda, and what happened. Honourable President, that is what I experienced since 1994. Because if I want to speak in my mother tongue language, or if I want my children to receive education in their mother tongue language, then we are under threat. what do I say? If we want to ensure that we address the issue of violence in South Africa, especially when it comes to women and children, there should be one central word: respect. Respect for yourself, respect for each other, but most important, respect for our differences. Because if we have respect for our differences, then there will be progress. If you look at the latest crime statistics, if you look at murders because of domestic violence, the cause of the most incidents that caused the death of domestic violence was arguments or a difference in opinion. In this house, how do we differ on our opinions? What example do we set for the people of South Africa? And that's why I said, if we want to do something, we have to ensure that we create respect in South Africa. You were right. I referred to the criminal justice system, and that criminals do not fear the police or our courts or correctional services. Ek wil vandag sê, agbare president, die strafregstelsel in Suid-Afrika het die mense van Suid-Afrika in die steek gelaat. Hoekom is misdadigers nie bang vir die strafregstelsel nie? Jy kan een woord daaroor skryf as gevolg van korrupsie. Want as dit nie die polisielid is wat deur korrupsie omgekoop word nie, dan is dit die staatsaanklaer, selfs landdroste. En as hulle in die tronke beland, dan bedryf hulle misdadigheid vanuit 'n beskermde posisie. En daarom, as jy dit wil aanspreek, sal jy moet korrupsie aanspreek. Another aspect is that we will have to remove the bad apples. There are too many bad apples in our criminal justice system. And may I make one proposal to improve, and that is when it comes to the police. And I said it many times. We can start by creating a specialized unit specific for murder and violent crimes. As ons weer teruggaan na moord en roof en dit direk aanspreek, dan verseker ek u, agbare president, sal daar 'n gesindheidsverandering ontstaan. Laastens wil ek vir u sê, dis ironies dat daar vandag 'n hofuitsprake is deur die Grondwethof wat sê jy mag nie jou kind 'n pak slaag gee by die huis nie. Ons wil dissipline hê. Ons wil respek kweek. Die Vryheidsfront Plus sê 'n goeie pak slaag op die regte tyd, op die regte manier, sal respek afdwing, sal dissipline handhaaf. Baie dankie.
And as you go, before you come in, the Premier of the Western Cape, Honorable Groenewald, if you have evidence of a magistrate or magistrate taking bribes, go and report it to the police, give evidence. The Chief Justice, I didn't say come here. I'm saying you must take that. The Chief Justice has requested properly that if any one of you have evidence of magistrate taking a bribe or being corrupt, take that evidence to the police and so on.
To a point of order, Honorable Deputy Speaker, this morning.
No.
You've asked me.
Moet dit nie nou doen nie, asseblief. Nee, ek sê nee. Moet dit nie nou doen nie, asseblief. Moet nou doen dit nie nou nie, asseblief.
Vra vir die agbare minister van polisie.
Take it to the police so that the Chief Justice call is complied with. Premier, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Honourable members of this House, Mr. President, thank you very much for calling this joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. Mr. President, I would like to start off by taking this House back to the 21st of November 2014. There was a debate a debate in this House of a joint sitting of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. And in that debate, they debated 16 days of activism on no violence against women and children. Mr. President, if you read that Hansard, it's like déjà vu. Mr. President, if you read that Hansard, it reminds me of a talk shop. So, Mr. President, I thank you for calling this session. But, Mr. President, we need to be very clear. Talk shops around fact-finding missions, talk shops about last year's summit on gender-based violence, talk shops about forums, commissions, committees, reviewing of legislation and interventions. Talk shops must end, Mr. President. Mr. President, I also stand here today to express my condolences, but also stand here today with an anger in my heart. I stand here today and I think of Valentia Farmer and the talk shop that followed her brutal murder and death. I think of Anine Boyson, who has been mentioned here today. I think of Uyenene, I think of Jessie Hess, and so many more women that have actually sparked this anger that I feel and the anger that I think our country is feeling, and it is evident. Mr. President, I stand here to say that the time for talking must stop. And I want to say, Mr. President, that tomorrow I, along with the Western Cape government, will make an announcement. We will make an announcement of the biggest, of the most comprehensive, the most expensive. I say again, the biggest, the most comprehensive, and the most expensive safety plan of any province ever in South Africa. Mr. President, I say this as a province who do not have the constitutional mandate of the criminal justice system or policing. I've said that before, that I do believe that that has to change. But while I really do believe that has to change, we will do and we will use funding, and we're going to have to stop programs and projects in our province in order to fund this plan, but we will do it because talk has ended and we must move to action.
Honourable Premier, please take your seat.
Deputy
Yes,
Speaker, the Honourable Minister Zulu has now twice shouted out the words, "You lie." It is not parliamentary to accuse any member participating in this debate of being a liar, and I would ask that you ask her to withdraw that and conduct herself like a Minister of State and not a backbencher.
Honourable Zulu, did you say that? Or the honourable members, I'm not asking you, I'm asking the minister. You keep quiet, we want to hear. Order.
Honorable Chairperson, yes, I did.
Withdraw that, ma'am.
I withdraw it, but he's still lying.
No. Honourable Minister, you can't say that. You withdraw unconditionally, please. Unconditionally.
I withdraw
You're a
unconditionally.
disgrace.
This is a serious debate, but he's not telling the truth.
Honourable Minister, with the greatest of respect, can you just withdraw and not say any more than that?
Okay, I withdraw. I'll talk to him outside.
I think, Honourable Minister, you are being contemptuous, and that's out of order. Frankly, you are out of order. Withdraw or leave. Order, honourable members. Honourable members of the DA. Honourable members of the DA, you will be in order. Honourable Minister, you do the right thing.
I withdraw.
Thank you. Proceed,
Agbare young speaker.
Speaker.
Agbare young speaker.
Speaker,
Punt van orde.
Honorable Speaker,
So,
I want to raise to your attention. South Africans are watching this particular debate. We can conduct ourselves in as many different ways as possible. But if we are actually serious about this, I want to call upon all the members in this House to say, let us conduct ourselves in a manner that invasifies the dignity of it. We must stop this conduct. It is out of order, Speaker.
Honorable members.
It is out of order.
Oh,
Can I ask you to address them? And let's be
Honorable
orderly.
Maimani, take your seat. Honorable Groenewald.
agbare young speaker, wat ek wou gesê het, ek het nou net gepraat om te sê wat is die voorbeeld wat hierdie huis stel as hulle geskille en verskille het. Dit is hoe dit gaan as ons van mekaar verskil. Daar's geen respek nie.
Ja.
Dit is onaanvaarbaar.
Yeah. Honorable members, can you be in order, please? All of you are out of order. None of you is innocent. Honorable members, be in order. Go ahead, Honorable Premier.
No, on a point of order. On a point of order. Speaker,
Yes, Honorable Member.
we don't accept that ruling because you can't generalize. We are not part of this mess.
I'm talking about people who I have addressed.
Yeah, but you can't
Take your
say
seat.
all of you.
Honorable
must be-
Member,
you
I'm
must
talking
be-
about...
You must be specific.
No, Honorable Malema, take your seat. I have addressed this House, and I'm talking to people who have spoken here, who I'm referring. Take your seat. Just listen. Just listen to that. Just listen to that. And you want to plead innocence. Please, can you be in order? Honorable Premier, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I will once again say that I'm going to launch the biggest safety plan that has ever been launched in any province in South Africa. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm also doing that with funding that I'm going to have to take away from other projects in order to make this happen. And I'm doing that because of the failure of the ANC in this country with regard to the criminal justice system and the policing system of keeping us safe in this country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I also stand here today and I would like to thank specifically the men.
Order, order, order. Order, Honorable Member. Go ahead, Honorable Member.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today and want to commend the women and the men who have stood up to say enough is enough. But I want to go further than that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Men in this country need to take responsibility. And Mr. Speaker, I stand here and I, as a father, as a husband, and as a man in this province and in this country, I take responsibility myself, but I also take responsibility as an elected public representative who swore an oath to the Constitution of this country. And that's why I will be making this announcement tomorrow. I will be making this announcement because the time is now. We have to stop talking. We have to move forward in this country. Enough is enough, Mr. President and Mr. Deputy Speaker. I listened to the President, and what he also did was he spoke about a 4-point plan. He spoke about a future, and we need to make sure that this is not another talk shop, Mr. Deputy Speaker and honorable members of this House. And you know he spoke about responsibility. I have just mentioned that men need to take responsibility in this space, and the President spoke about who needs to take responsibility in this plan. But what I didn't hear is who in this House is going to take responsibility for this plan, Mr. President. Mr. President, you as the President need to take responsibility. Your ministers need to take responsibility. We have just heard in this country, we've just had the crime statistics. Year after year, these statistics get worse and worse. Who is responsible, Mr. President? Whose head is going to roll as it gets worse and worse, Mr. President? We need to make sure that we in this House, the leadership And I agree with those that stood up and said this House is the leadership in our country, and look at how we behave. We need to take that responsibility, Mr. President, and if this is not going to be a talk shop, it is going to be action, then heads need to roll when we do not see a change in our country, Mr. President. Heads need to roll, because I agree with the people of South Africa. Enough is enough. Thank you.
Honorable Mishra.
Deputy Speaker, on behalf of responsible men, fathers and husbands, I want to strongly condemn violence that has been directed at women and children in our country. The ACDP is on record for always condemning sexual and gender-based violence whenever the subject has been raised, and our position on this issue will never change. This is an endemic that government must prioritize and tackle head-on. We do not believe that government has done enough to stop gender-based violence. Government has not acted harshly, particularly against politicians who have been found to be committing acts of violence or sexual abuse against women. Deputy Speaker, in May 2016, during a clash between EFF MPs and parliamentary security officers, the nation was shocked to see a female security officer who fell to the ground during a scuffle, being assaulted and repeatedly kicked by some members of parliament. More than 3 years have passed since that assault, and nothing has been done about it. It is a shame and hypocritical for politicians to stand here in this House to condemn gender-based violence while they turn a blind eye to it when it happens among them. Where is justice for this female security officer who was killed when she was on the floor? In the brief time remaining, I would like to offer some solutions that, if implemented, would help to effectively address the scourge. Firstly, I believe government will go a long way in restoring the dignity of women by banning all forms of pornography which objectifies women as sex objects. The ACDP has for years said that pornography is the theory, but rape is the act. Secondly, there must be harsher punishment for rape, and rapists must be denied bail and parole. This would help send a clear message that our justice system is serious about fighting gender-based violence. Our justice system must be given stronger teeth to swiftly and effectively deal with cases of rape and sexual violence. Thirdly, victims of rape must be protected from corrupt and immoral police officers who sometimes abuse and mistreat them when they come to report cases of rape. These officers must be purged from our police service and face the full might of the law. The ACDP says victimizing of victims of rape and sexual abuse must stop. Lastly, Deputy Speaker, I want to remind all men that our responsibility is to protect and love women and children and not to harm them. They must know that we care for them and will do our utmost to protect them and not to harm them. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Holomisa.
Deputy Speaker, Honorable President, and honorable members, I think, Mr. President, you spoke like a commander-in-chief today, and we should thank you for that. The UDM commends the fact that Parliament is debating solutions on matters of gender-based violence, child abuse, rampant crime in general, as well as lawlessness. We are here today in response to the brave women of this country who said, no more. This House and the executive must prioritize finding solutions, even if it means that we must reconsider budget allocations, as the President has already indicated. Everyone living in this country must, at all times, be protected and should feel safe in their homes and in our streets. For the executive to act decisively and to make manifest the constitutional mandate of safety and security for the people, it might mean that our civil liberties could be affected. One other matter which I would like to raise is that of striking an accord between SADC countries to address security and home affairs issues. Cross-border crime, moving stolen vehicles and livestock, as well as the banning of trade goods, should be a thing of the past. Our economies must be protected, for if one country is unstable, all are affected. Regarding the recent xenophobic attacks, we condemned it in the strongest terms. I, however, wish to mention that South Africa is the only country that does not have refugee camps, with non-South Africans being integrated, as we all know, since 1994. We indeed have people from the rest of the continent, Europe, America, and Far East, who live peacefully and prosper in South Africa. Finally, Mr. President, if one looks at the vast amounts of money that is siphoned away through corruption, our obsolete military equipment, poor training and equipping of our security services, and the criminal justice system, it is clear that we still have much work to do. I thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Zungula.
Thank you, Speaker.
Deputy.
Yeah, Deputy Speaker. Maybe I'm promoting you. I'd really hope today we'll put our political differences aside and focus on the monster called gender-based violence, instead of focusing on who is saying what. Because we've got a gender-based violence that is 5 times higher than the global average. Therefore, it cannot be business as usual. Our approach to deal with the gender-based violence must be a combination of preventative, responsive, and punitive measures. We must prevent gender-based violence by instilling humanness and respect for women in boy children so that they do not grow up to be monsters. There must be a focus on teaching young boys on gender-based violence in order to have a gender-based violence-free society in the future. In places of worship, schools, and homes, boys must be taught on gender-based violence. Police officers must be trained and sensitized on the issues of gender-based violence and how to handle them. Women and children must not be further traumatized in the process of reporting cases. Ufika umama xa yoripota icase epolice station, ipolisa libuza ukuba uwenzeni wena mama, kutheni ungamxoleli, instead of dealing with the case. The seriousness with which the legal system treats rape cases needs to be sympathetic to women and children. All police stations, clinics, hospitals, at all times must have rape kits. It is an embarrassment that last month, only 76% of police stations did not have adult rape kits, and a further 69% did not have child rape kits. We must make it easier for women and children to report sexual assault. And let us understand, longer prison sentences are simply not good enough, and in fact have failed dismally to reduce perpetrators. Inmates serving those prison terms are still going to be fed, clothed, and educated by their victims. I really do not understand what type of a justice system is it that the victims have to pay for the livelihood of the perpetrators. In our prisons, there is a Moses Sithole who raped and killed 40 women. And there is Samson Madala, who was serving 2 life sentences earlier this year, who killed and raped prison warders in prison. Therefore, we need to send a strong message that we do not tolerate gender-based violence by having a death penalty for heinous crimes against women and children. Malawi has got a zero tolerance for killing of people living with albinism. We must not tolerate and justify the actions of people who have got no regard for human life. If you repeatedly kill, you must be deemed to have revoked your own right to life. We can't have a government
Your
that is
time
academically
has
protecting
expired.
perpetrators. Thank you.
Honorable the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Antipet.
Deputy Speaker, honourable members, honourable President, as good we welcome your emergency plan and the 1.1 billion rand towards that. I think now we've reached a turning point in our country. For the first time, there's a clear plan of action for all of us. I hear we talking about this we and we. We includes all of us, all of the leaders in South Africa. Our women and our children are under attack in our country. Our country is bleeding. And so we've had enough. We've been mourning. We've been sympathizing with the women that were raped in our country. But it's a responsibility that rests with all of us. Mr. President, just 3 months ago, all of us as political leaders, we crossed the length and the breadth of this country asking our people to vote for us. We must now go back, all of us, and go and preach an anti-gender-based violent message to the very same people that have voted for us. Then people will take us serious in this country. So all of us have got a responsibility. I speak now as the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure. Already we're beginning to identify buildings so that we can convert them into safe spaces. Many women stay in these abusive relationships because they got nowhere to go. And we all have to work together. All three spheres of government must release buildings for safe spaces. Also, Mr. President, these messages must be for 365 days a year. I'm just concerned that once the violence has subsided, then the messages also stop. And therefore, we need to develop strong billboards, and we will use all government-owned buildings to put those billboards up, and we have the message in the faces of those monsters on a daily basis. This scourge in our country calls for mass mobilization of all of us. And if we don't rise to the occasion now, history will judge all of us. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Honorable Klute.
What are we doing with our hands, Speaker, through you? Hoe het ons by die punt gekom, President, dat ons moet praat oor geweld teen vroue? Dit behoort 'n gegewe te wees waar goeie waardes in 'n land geld. Parliament should be working towards answers to service delivery, poverty and unemployment, but yet here we are, Speaker, debating something that should never have been an issue. Like the President said, this is indeed a dark shadow in the country. Ja, Speakers, vir enige vorm van geweld mag geweld teen vroue nie welkom wees in Suid-Afrika nie. Maar elkeen van ons het 'n verantwoordelikheid om iets daaraan te doen. Ons kan nie net meer praat nie. To the women who have been victims of gender-based violence, this government needs to say sorry for failing you. But also, sorry that we have become a nation of double standards. We cannot have the Secretary General, the ruling party, degrading people by referring to them as, and I think I need to say, pardon my language, kwere kwere, or kwere kwere, without a word from the President. Whilst others are renowned for firing guns in public and tweeting photos of the late President Robert Mugabe with the words, "The only white man you can trust is a dead white man." What would happen if all South Africans act upon their impulses, as some do, and shove anyone around? Then this country is doomed. Anyone debating today who's not consistent in what they say and what they do is reducing this debate to mere virtue signaling. Speaker, you cannot raise one hand for the end to violence and in one form and show a fist of violence in another form. What are we doing with our hands, Speaker? Are we helping or are we hitting? Are we building or are we breaking and looting and stealing? Are we taking responsibility for ourselves and our future, or are we pointing to others?
Expired.
We should start doing the right thing and do good to each other.
Your time has expired.
That's the real solution. That's the real solution we're looking for, President. Thank you.
Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Mr. President, on behalf of the National Freedom Party, allow me to commend you for your intervention. I think it was long overdue that we needed to have dealt with this. We come in here year in, year out, particularly in the Women's Month, on Women's Day. We debate these things, but very little action, and I think it is time. But let me just start off by saying that many of us in this House, particularly wherever we govern, must take responsibility for where we are today. You know, the Premier of the Western Cape said he's going to spend a lot of money, and rightfully you should be spending a lot of money, because the challenges that the people face in the Western Cape is exactly because of you and what you've done to the people in the Western Cape. So let us be very, very honest about it. I mean, for the last 9 years in the Western Cape, or the last 10 years, or whenever you've been governing even before that, if you look at the challenges, the special planning in the Western Cape, particularly in the city of Cape Town, and rightfully, like the Minister of Police said earlier on today, you wouldn't find these things in Constantia and Bishop's Court in those areas. So the question I want to ask, in that whole lot of money you're planning to spend, are you going to take some of our people, our poorest of the poor, and move them to Constantia, and so that they can also live and enjoy the fruits of living in a decent environment? Mr. President, the issue of xenophobia, and let me tell you, Mr. President, where it also comes from. The reckless utterances that are made by leaders and politicians. We started in this country of talking about the white man, we talk about the Indian man, we talk about the colored man that does not have rights, that nothing belongs to him, it only belongs. What is that doing? It is actually encouraging this racial divide. Now, after the white, you went to the Indian, you went to the colored, now you're going to the foreign, and you were correct, Mr. President, when you said now it's going to be a Zulu thing and a Xhosa thing, and that's where it's going to go to. I've heard a lady say to me, two of her very close colleagues were talking, no, don't put that lady on that list because she's Xhosa, we are Zulu speaking. So you can see where it is coming from. But, Mr. President, let me say the issue in terms of violence in the country is really growing out of proportion. But, very importantly, a lady said to me the other day, she has a 2.5-year-old child and she wants to leave the country. But she said to her husband, if I'm going to stay in this country, then you have to employ security to take my child to school and bring back my child. That is the fear that our people live in and day out in the country. But, Mr. President, very quickly, I just want to say some of the solutions. I think we need a national crime strategy to sit down and identify all the challenges that we face in the coming. Shebeens, the taverns, particularly in the city of Cape Town, is one of the greatest causes of crime, and particularly at night, so we need to have a specific time, close them at night throughout South Africa, and half your crime rate is down, according to the statistics of the South African Police Services. That's the other thing that they've done. Your criminal justice system appears to be a serious challenge, particularly it is now, the Deputy Minister earlier on even confirmed
Honorable Sheikh
that a great percentage are repeat
I'm afraid your
offenders
time
in
is
South Africa.
expired.
Very close to every criminal going to become a repeat offender, and if we don't deal with that, there is no place in the prisons.
Honorable
The National Freedom Party supports your initiative. Thank you very much.
Honorable Gallo.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Honorable President, our research data indicates that the last time we had a special joint sitting was in 2005, when former President Thabo Mbeki addressed Parliament on the release of former Deputy President Jacob Zuma from his responsibilities. 14 years down the line, His Excellency President Ramaphosa has, in terms of Section 84, subsection D of the Constitution, called this joint sitting to debate the scourge of femicide and gender-based violence. But, Honorable President, perhaps we need to face things as they are. We are missing the point here, Honorable President, because we are sitting with an enemy, and if we are not defeating this enemy, which is poverty, we are still going to have these challenges in our country. It can't be correct that after 25 years of the so-called democracy, we are still having people, I repeat this, we are still having people who are starving to death. From 2014, there were ministers here who were getting 50,000 a month. Just imagine if that money was directed to the needy people of this country. Mr. President, we need to do something here. Otherwise, we are in danger. I'm not going to repeat the statistics by the police ministry as to what is it that we are faced with. This anomaly is progressively surging at a breakneck speed. The root causes of gender-based violence are vast and distinct. We will not recount them here, but we must emphasize that our attention has not attracted the subject of molding the boy child. For an example, the work of NECRO, which is a private NGO, only focuses on diverting youth and adult offenders away from the normal criminal justice system into specialist developmental therapeutic programs. We only enter the fray, all of us, when the boy child is already an offender, and fail to mold young and responsible men before they engage in criminal activities. The lack of strong family units in our country is a cause for concern.
Honorable Gallo, I'm afraid your time has expired.
Thank you very much.
Honorable Mfaila. Please.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, the President, and members all, South Africa is experiencing gender-based violence, like a sickness that is uncontrolled. In fact, calling violence against our women a sickness does not adequately express my distress for gender-based violence. In fact, we must simply see this for what it is: a disease that is taking control of our nation and a disease that brings shame in our country. Mr. President, the police have to be effective in dealing with this scourge. Justice system has to improve as well. But can we then sit back and say our work is done, Mr. President? The answer is no. Who have we become? That we have to be guided by the police not to harm our wives, our children, and ourselves. When are we going to make an effort to deal with who we have become? The longer we postpone that task, Mr. President, it is harder we make the work of the police and the justice system and delay the healing of our society. We do shameful things, Mr. President, that even animals cannot do. We need to sit down as a nation and ask ourselves as to who we have become. Mr. President, the issue of xenophobia, because we have touched in your speech, ngifuna ukuthi kuwe phuthuma shaya umthetho oqinile ovimba ukuthi abantu abafowethu nodadewethu bangaphandle babizwe ngamakerokere ngoba yicala lelo. Siyazi ukuthi kunamagama amaningi angasabizwa manje ayekhona ngobandlululo. Yingani leli lingashaywa lumthetho kuba livalwe ngoba anybody who comes from anybody who comes from any country in Africa is our brother and sister. I thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Mr. President and the House, I have been thinking for a considerable time as the debate is going on as to what is it that we are not doing, that we are not recognizing progress on this question. And I think that it is clear to all of us, at least those of us who have been looking at our society. The problem must be starting in the home. If the father is a drunkard, the children will definitely be drunkards. They will be. Yes, so it is so. It is so, because the first lesson.
Please.
I don't understand why you object.
Honorable members.
It is so if the father is a drunkard, because that is the first lesson. The child look at you as the father or the mother. If the parents are drunkards, what are you going to expect from the children? It's like that. We must attack this problem in the homes. We must attack these problems in the homes. And I'm going to say this. If all of us were to wake up and say every day, because my mother was a woman, I will not strike a woman. Because my mother was a woman, I will respect all other women. Because my sister is the mother of tomorrow, I will not strike my sister. Because I don't want to teach, to show something that I will regret tomorrow. How can you say I'm wrong? I can't be wrong when I'm saying your behavior is what you teach your children. Can we agree that when we live here, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, every day, in the communities, we must be the leaders who say to our people, because my mother was a woman, I will not strike a woman. If you don't want to say that, you must say the opposite. You must say, I'm still going to strike women. Let us say we are going to say that to our children, to our communities, to our followers. Because my mother was a woman, I will not strike a woman. Because my daughter is the mother of tomorrow, I will not strike my daughter. And I'll teach my sons, don't strike your sisters. They are the mothers of tomorrow. I thank you.
Honorable Nyonso. Thank you.
Deputy Speaker, Comrade President, the PAC expresses deepest sympathy and heartfelt condolences to all the families who lost their loved ones through gender-based violence and femicide, including the survivors who walk with scars. The matter of women in South Africa over recent weeks has ignited public outrage and street protests, rightfully so. The murderer is someone's son, father, brother. What are we as the society doing about this? Why must we condone this barbaric violation of women's rights as a society? All perpetrators come from our families and neighborhood, yet we see no reason to hand them over to the relevant authorities that will deal with them. This is no longer a problem. This is no longer a problem that must be tackled, resolved by government alone.
Honorable members, let's proceed. There are people who will ask them to leave there. Proceed.
Our communities must be part of the solution. PAC supports the call for urgent drastic measures to be taken against all perpetrators. PAC is concerned with slow pace government is taking to implement stringent actions against those who commit gender-based violence. Lest we forget, women are very important. They gave birth to all of us. Women deserve to be treated far better than how we treat them. Gender-based violence has reached extreme levels which can no longer be tolerated. We support the creation, updating and monitoring the sex offenders register and make it public so that the world will know the devils that are hell-bent on destroying a good name of our country. A man who rapes a woman, a child and babies destroys their lives. What type of a person who rapes a 9-month-old baby still in nappies? What type of a person who rapes an 8-year-old woman? What type of a person who rapes his wife and daughters? What type of person who rapes and murders women who are looking for employment? What type of person kills his wife and children? The law must be amended to include femicide and rape cases to carry heavy sentences as a deterrent, as well as to support the resolutions of national gender-based violence against women and children. The Beijing Declaration needs to be reconsidered as they are still relevant. Government must ensure that there is effective interdepartmental coordination mechanism to offer continuum of services to the victims. As Africans, we need to go back to the drawing board and review where we went wrong. The principles of humanity must be brought back and emphasized in all spheres of operations, especially respect in communities. The naming and shaming of perpetrators must be a deliberate program in fighting this scourge. Our responsibility as this parliament is to find solutions and to be service to Africa. Men should develop a show of true respect for African womanhood and demonstrate in practice the theory of gender equality in our country.
Thank you,
gender-based cases must be fast-tracked and no bail, no parole must be given to offenders. I thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Mukausi.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Commander-in-Chief and President of the EFF, one of the bravest young leader of our time. From the benches of the EFF and its entire membership, we know for sure that you have long committed to fighting gender violence. And you have committed and even said in all platforms that perpetrators of gender violence do not have space in our society, do not have space in the entire membership of the economic freedom fighters. Mr. President, we have cried, our mothers have cried, our sisters have cried, our daughters have cried, and we are saying enough is enough. Even when we say enough is enough, Mr. President, we know for sure that we are next. We know that we are next because the war has intensified. Women and children living with disabilities are also victims of the war that men in South Africa have waged on defenseless women and children. It is war, Mr. President. There's no other term for it. There's no other way to call it, and we cannot continue ignoring it, Mr. President. While men in South Africa have declared war against women and children, including children living with disability, your government continue supporting them. Mr. President, we say so that your government continues supporting them because police stations do not have ramps for wheelchairs users and are not accessible for women and children using wheelchairs. Police stations do not have basic information on braille material for people living with visual impaired. Mr. President, right here in this very same house yesterday, during the provincial week in the Northwest Provincial Legislature, one of our members could not access the building because there's no such facility for wheelchair users. Are we still continuing to say that your government is going to make sure that buildings are accessible, whilst simple buildings where even lawmakers need to access those buildings are not accessible?
When we are raped, beaten, and molested, Mr. President, we cannot go to police station and clinics because there's no such facilities of wheelchair users. Hospitals and clinics do not provide basic information on braille material. Nurses and doctors are not trained to assist people with visual impaired. Mr. President, when you are busy with the Minister of Health and Minister of Police fixing these things, that shouldn't have been a problem for a very long time. Let's agree that next time when you come here to this very same house, because we know it will only be next year, to speak about such issues, you need to tell us that your government has a record of all women and children living with disability in South Africa. You need to tell us that all women and children living with disability do access government buildings where they need to get help. You need to tell us that women and children living with disability do have houses and their children are at school, Mr. President, with no challenges. Mr. President, we need to agree and speak in one voice that ukutwala is woman abuse. An abduction of young girls is therefore a serious crime. Let us speak openly about these issues. All women who have abducted here, all men who have abducted young women in the name of marriage must be arrested and be sent to jail. We need to act, and we need to act now. Mr. President, gender-based violence is reinforced by poverty, joblessness, and terrible conditions which our people live in. We must transform the life of the people from the life of violence, including violence against women and children living with disability. Mr. President, we need to know what we're dealing with here. Tell us yourself, Mr. President, we want to know. In your lifetime and most recent time, you yourself never laid a hand nor raged against women. We must know, President. Mr. President, not long ago, we had a similar debate in this very same house. In your absence, in the absence of the Minister of Police, in the absence of the Minister of Intelligence, and from the benches of the economic freedom fighters, we raised this issue to say, your benches do not take matters of national importance seriously. Your benches are only doing lip service. Maybe, Mr. President, you need to admit that you do have an incompetent cabinet, the cabinet which do not take our people serious. Mr. President, maybe you need to come clean and tell us, if you have lost the battle of presidency, do we have an incompetent president here together with his cabinet? Come clean, Mr. President. We want to know what we're dealing with here. Thank you.
Honorable Hendricks.
Honorable Chair, we all know of the atrocities committed against women in Bosnia. The Sheikh of Bosnia visited us in Hanover Park at the Mountview Mosque and told women to train to defend themselves as they cannot depend on men to protect them. Honorable Chair, the President has acted swiftly to make resources available to address gender oppression. Women have been oppressed during apartheid, and it is not right that they continue to be oppressed during the 5 parliaments. The 6th parliament is set to leave a legacy that they introduced special measures to stop the oppression against women. I don't think the President will have a quarrel to work with all political parties to use the extra resources and introduce the special measures. Men who rape women and a girl child and then murder them, the life sentence or blacklisting is not a deterrent. So Al-Jamaa wants hard labor in addition to the life sentence from the first day of sentencing. And we want especially men to see the perpetrators engage in hard labor. This will be a deterrent no matter what human rights and democracy NGOs have to say. If this is going to dent our image as a democracy, let it be. The Sixth Parliament has set an example to strengthen the gender machinery, especially during August, and this has inspired Al-Jamaah to set up a unit with 5 pro bono desks at its parliamentary office to assist women who are physically abused. Al-Jamaah thanks the President for the decisive measures he has put in place. Yes, political parties, including Al-Jamaah this morning, gave their support to the President. And Honorary President, you can count on Al-Jamaah. It looks that you cannot count and depend on the official opposition. We heard about a safety plan for the Western Cape, and I fear that the plan will only make the leafy and beachy suburbs safe at the expense of the Cape Flats and Khayelitsha. The Western Cape government must work with the President. That money must go towards the new national plan. It has a clear plan of action, like Honorary De Lille stated. We must not try to outsmart other promises with our brinkmanship.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services.
Thank you, Chairperson. Honorable President of the Republic, I accept the challenge from the President to man up as South African men and kill the demon that lives in us as men. That is the demon of beating women, the demon of raping, abusing, and it is a challenge that all of us as men of South Africa must accept. Honorable members, this past Friday, I had the privilege to open the SABC Sexual Offences Court, which is the 94th Sexual Offences Court since the department started reopening Sexual Offences Court in 2013. We will add more Sexual Offences Courts before the end of this financial year, 11 of them. In the year 2000, we had a conviction rate of 48%, and today the NPA has a conviction rate of 74%. This has been authenticated by the Monitor Research Group, Honorable Maimane. The less than 5% conviction rate is not a true reflection of the work of the NPA. There can be a conviction rate if there is no arrest, as Mr. Maimane says, that there are no arrests. So where does a less than 5% conviction rate come from? You cannot have a conviction rate. Let's use evidence-based approach to strengthen and make an efficient criminal justice system. The Chief Justice has concurred with the regulations with regard to the Sexual Offences Court, and the regulations will be gazetted soon. These regulations are going to make the minimum standards of the Sexual Offences Court operational. These Sexual Offences Courts are notions which use modern technology. The notion of testifying in front of offenders can be mitigated through a closed-circuit television camera. Furthermore, what has become even more clearer to us is that the correlation between the establishment of these Sexual Offences Courts and the conviction rates. In the last 2 weeks, the Sexual Offences Courts have meted out heavy sentences. An offender was sentenced to 4 life sentences for 4 counts of rape by the Hammanskraal Magistrate Court. Another one was sentenced to life imprisonment, 50 years more. Another one was sentenced to 7 life sentences, plus 76 years by the KwaZulu-Natal Sexual Offences Courts. In evaluating the prosecution of sexual offences, it is to be noted that for the fourth consecutive year, a national conviction rate of above 70% was achieved, both in relation to sexual offences prosecution in relation to the Tutuzela care centers. These conviction rates of above 70% is a substantial improvement since 2000. In perspective, the quality of sexual offences cases finalized with a verdict equals 6,353 with 4,724 convictions. Regarding the Sexual Offences Court, 6,336 convictions in that regard. And this reflects the work that the Tutuzela Care Centers has been able to help us with. We agree that there are challenges, but we need to help to strengthen these Tutuzela Care Centers, the work of the NPA, through the process that the President has announced. From the Tutuzela Care Center cases, over the past 2 financial years, 612 life imprisonment sentences, 368 sentences for 20 to 25 years imprisonment, and 1,463 sentences of 10 to 19 years imprisonment were handed down. These sentences are an exclusive on rape offenses, Schedule 1 of the Criminal Procedure Act, in line with the minimum sentence regulations. Honorable members, I believe the statistics I have quoted here reveal that the collaboration we have with civil society organizations, NGOs, the Department of Social Development, the South African Police Service, and other stakeholders through the Tutuzela Care Centers is essential. We need all South Africans to help us to work more, because our statistics reveals that about 23% of people who go to the Tutuzela Care Centers do not want to open dockets. And this is a work we need to work on so that our people have confidence to open the dockets and proceed. And also many in society don't want to open dockets. This evidence must help us to encourage members of society to join in with the police, with the NPA, and everyone to fight this scourge of gender-based violence. This has shown us that nothing can beat a nation working together. This is what will deter many people from committing crimes, in particular gender-based violence. A nation that collectively deals with criminality will be able to defeat any scourge of crime. It will not be the death penalty because it has already been declared unconstitutional. It will not pass constitutional muster. We have got evidence. Let's use evidence-based to be able to develop policy in response to this matter. And this evidence we have the statistics. The Tutuzela Care Centers ensure that matters which are reported to them are prosecutorial-driven investigations with in-house social workers and various victim support mechanisms, including court preparations and support to make the victims familiar with and comfortable with the court process. It has become evident that we have to work towards decreasing also the withdrawal of matters that are reported. As it stands, about 37% of the victims withdraw some of the matters that are reported. In that same vein, government has invested a great deal of resources to understand what stops victims from reporting or withdrawing when they withdraw such crimes. The evidence gathered over a period of 5 years thus far illustrates that having faith and understanding of the justice system is immensely important. Our victim-centered approach is beginning to yield results. Let's build from this approach, and I think the measures announced by the President will help us to strengthen this approach, which has proven to work. Another area which requires a great deal of improvement is the finalization rate of sexual offenses matters. There is certainly room for ample improvement here across the entire justice system, from investigations to prosecution, social workers, judicial officers, medical and legal practitioners. The actions which we agree should be taken to this end. To this end, we'll be looking into clearing the backlog of cases in our courts with regard to gender-based violence. We will put in place procedures and measures to review and on complaints against police and prosecutors who fail our people on the GBV matters. We will also ensure that the laws that address the economic plight of women that the President has already spoken about are prioritized. The Victim Services Bill will also be quickly finalized in this House. We have also introduced the recognitions of the Customary Marriages Amendment Act to equalize the distribution of assets when husband and men who were married customarily are divorced. The bill is now in this House. We will also introduce a gender-based violence and femicide bill, domestic violence and harassment, review of the Sexual Offences Amendment Bill. All the above will be done during the current financial year. Honorable Speaker, as we speak, we are sitting with 20,330 inmates who have been convicted of sexual offences. In partnership with the University of Limpopo, we have developed a rehabilitation program for the offenders of sexual offenses, which include training programs on dating as well as psychological assessments of these offenders in partnership with the Department of Social Development. I have called on the department to conduct an evaluation report to help us assess how effective these programs are and can be done to enhance, because every day we sometimes see our parolees being involved or committing crimes. And this is a worry because this study is aimed to help us respond and turn the tide of our parolees going back to crime again. Honorable members, gender-based violence is a product of many facets of our society. The criminal justice system is just one part of the puzzle, which can only manifest itself when an incident has occurred. Whilst we will want survivors to have more faith in the justice system, we need to have faith in our social structures first. The NGOs, civil societies, sports bodies, churches, all of them need to help us play a role to defeat this scourge. If we are to really embody the words of Thomas Sankara in his assertion that there is no true social revolution without the liberation of women, then we must regard the scourge of gender-based violence.
Prime Minister.
Thank you very much.
That, honorable members, concludes the speaker's list, and I will now invite the Honorable President to reply.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Deputy or Chairperson of the Council of Provinces. Before I proceed with my brief response and remarks, I wish to express with a sense of deep sorrow on behalf of all South Africans at the sudden and the tragic passing of Deputy Minister Baveli Lehlongwa. As a nation and as a cabinet, we've been robbed of an outstanding and committed South African patriot. We extend our deepest condolences and sympathies to her family, her colleagues, her comrades, and her friends. She was one of the rising bright sparks of our government, and I had occasion to see her, to hear her at work in our cabinet, in various committees, and I was always so impressed, and it is a real loss to all of us who knew her, and we do indeed extend our condolences. Let us dedicate all the measures that we agreed to so that we can, during the course of this administration and also the course of the life of this Parliament, to her memory, and may her soul rest in peace. Honorable members, I also would like to extend my gratitude to those who participated in the joint sitting in this debate. It is clear from the debate that has taken place that we do have a vibrant Parliament. Even those who are watching at home will have seen that even as we discuss matters of great importance, it is a vibrant Parliament.
They should not be alarmed even as they watch from home. This is how democracy works, and this is how democracy rolls. The situation the country is facing demands that we adapt and evolve in response to the changing circumstances. Matata a re shebaneng le ona, mo lefatsheng le la rona, a tlhoka gore ka nnete re ikemisetse, re bontshe ka nnete gore ha re dutse fa re baemedi ba setšhaba kaofela, ha go tlhaga mathata a tjena re tla kgona gore re dule re buisane sentle, re bontshane gore re isa kae naga ena. France and Spain, so that we should never think that we are alone in this, and a number of other African countries have been dealing with this problem as well. France announced a number of measures and interventions after they too experienced a spate of deaths of women at the hands of men. Spain has also done exactly the same. They've come up with a number of measures. And they, like us, have also committed a number of resources to address this scourge. A few African countries have also been dealing with precisely this challenge. So we are not alone. But we are different. We're different in that our incidence of femicide, of rape, is much higher than many other countries in the world. And it is for this reason that we have had to come up with this emergency plan. And the broader strategic plan is still being worked on by the various structures that we have set in place, but it will come. But we felt that we should not wait. We should address this challenge with the immediacy that it requires. Where something has worked, it must be strengthened. There are quite a number of initiatives that we have taken that have worked, and we would like to see how we strengthen them. Where what we have tried has not really worked, and the women of our country are absolutely correct in raising their frustration, their anger, and their concern about measures that we have adopted and embarked upon in the past that they believe and feel that have not worked. We must therefore either abandon those that have not worked and also close the loopholes, but reinforce our commitment to addressing the challenges that the women of our country are facing. The various speakers today have pointed to policy disjuncture in a number of areas relating to our efforts on gender-based violence. It is clear we must conduct an audit of national legislation and policies to address the shortcomings, the duplication, and even conflict and mismatch. Utodea uri hezwi ri tshi sedza zwithu hezwi zwoṱhe na milayo ine ra vha nayo na mashumele ane ra vha nao ka hezwi zwe ra zwi ita kale, ri sumbedzane uri ana ri khou balelwa ngafhi u ya phanḓa zwavhuḓi nga hezwi zwe ra langana ngazwo. Wa ṱoḓea uri zwithu zwoṱhe zwine ra ḓo zwi ita ri tshi lwisa hezwi zwine zwa khou itea hafhanoni shangoni ḽashu zwa u vhulaya vhathu vha vhafumakadzi, zwa u reipa vhathu vha vhafumakadzi na vhana vhaṱukuṱuku, ri zwi ite nga u ṱalifha, ri zwi ite nga u sumbedzana zwavhuḓi uri ri ḓo zwi ita hani. We must also enhance the capacity of Parliament, yes, to do what even Honorable Maimane said. I'd like to initiate legislation. When it comes to a matter like this, I would like to invite all of us to pay attention, even as it may come either as a member's bill. This should be dealt with as a common problem right across. That's what we should be able to do. So, and I was very attentive as Honorable Maimane highlighted and pointed out the areas that they would like this bill to cover. And I would like to say, honorable members, let us debate that. Let us engage with what will be brought forward so that we tighten up the loopholes, we tighten up the laws that we have. So I'm really encouraged that the leaders or the parties represented in this parliament have said that, yes, they will champion the eradication of gender-based violence. I welcome, yes, the proposal also of establishing a structure of this parliament, be it an ad hoc committee on gender-based violence or an oversight committee. I think that is the right way to go. And I would say that, yes, the governing structures of our parliament should look at this so that we can demonstrate to the women of our country ukuthi sizimisele ngempela ukuthi lokhu okwenzekayo lapho lokubulala abantu besifazane nokuhlukumeza abantu besifazane iyona into esizawuyilwisa siyiparlamente yalelizwe lakithi. Sizobabonisa kahle uma le committee Honorable Maimane nabanye bebekhuluma ngayo ukuthi ibe khona. Ngiyakuvuma lokho ukuthi mayibe khona leyo committee sizokwazi ukubonisa kahle ukuthi sizimisele. We agree that we need a reliable and decisive police service. One of the issues that many of our people are complaining about, and we honor the members of the police service in our country, the South African Police Service, who are continuously dedicated to the work they do, who in many ways are also putting their own lives at risk to protect our nation, to investigate crimes, and we honor them for that, and we thank them. Sometimes they even do thankless tasks. But at the same time, when we go around the country and talk to our people, they always complain about some members of the police service who they believe are not as committed as they would like to see them, where they believe that they are either lackadaisical in the way that they investigate some of these challenges that the women of our country face, where if rape is reported, the police officers just take it very lightly and even discourage victims of rape or violence even for reporting those. And we want to call upon all the police in our country to demonstrate that they are really dedicated and they are there to serve the women of our country. And it is for this reason that we say there needs to be retraining. The training of our police officers, to me, has become a very important issue, so that the service that they give should be the type of service that will serve the women of our country well. And one of the things we have to look at is strengthening coordination and information sharing to ensure that perpetrators do not slip between the cracks. Offenders who have protection orders or cases pending against them are being granted bail because a court is not even aware of them. As a result, they go out, offend once again, and sometimes even continue with their killing spate against women and vulnerable people. Women are dying with protection orders in their homes, and we therefore need to pay attention to all this. Modernizing the criminal justice system is critical if we want to see real progress in the fight against gender-based violence. Because we are still using outdated technology and practices, we have problems with victim statements not being recorded accurately or even vanishing. Dockets just disappear and so forth, and the perpetrators go loose. The lengthy days in investigating some of these sexual offenses is often the result of poor evidence collection and bad management of evidence. As several members have noted here, the task of investigating and prosecuting acts of violence against women is undermined by the lack of resources. Resources in the form of, yes, the tools of the trade that our police need to have, but also not having sufficient numbers of the police officers to be in place to be able to deal with this scourge. We know, for instance, there are shortages of police kits, and we're absolutely right in saying that we need our police stations to have rape kits in great numbers. But there is also some of our areas that are experiencing shortage of, for instance, laboratories for DNA testing. Yesterday I was in the Eastern Cape, and the Premier, Mabuyane, was saying that in the Eastern Cape they don't even have a DNA testing. And they have to send DNA specimens to Durban, to KZN, or to the Western Cape. And as part of the action plan, this action plan that we are talking about, we have agreed that we are going to establish one in the Eastern Cape this year, in fact, within the next few months. This we need to do because quite a number of acts of rape and abuse of women continue to happen in the Eastern Cape in greater number. On victim support, we must work to avoid survivors being treated badly when they report crimes. We must expedite the distribution and implementation of the guidelines, the revised guidelines for the management of survivors of sexual violence, and each investigating officer must not only have a copy, but they must be trained in how they should utilize those guidelines. Both charge office staff and investigating officers should also be trained, and these guidelines need to be the guidelines that will be utilized to facilitate them handling these sexual assault cases properly. One of us mentioned the issue of corporal punishment. Now today the Constitutional Court has handed down an extremely significant judgment declaring corporal punishment in the home to be unconstitutional. When we talk about violence against children, we focus on sexual abuse, but the battering of children is a very serious problem that must also get sufficient attention. Children do need and must be protected from all forms of violence, whether it is in the home, in the streets, or in the schools. That is what the Constitution of our country dictates. This judgment will send a strong message that beating of children will not be tolerated at all costs. So that is what our court has decided in interpretation of our Constitution.
On a point of order, Chair.
What is the point of order?
All of these people are guilty of what you are talking about. Beating children. These ones, yeah.
That's not the point of order. Please proceed, Mr. President.
What this debate has also shown is that we all need to come together to find solutions to this problem of gender-based violence, and that this movement that is being led by women should be a movement that we appropriate. We must, all of us, join in. We must have a clear understanding that our role is to support this effort that our nation must now take up so that in the end we do bring an end to gender-based violence. On drugs and alcohol abuse, the Honorable Sheikh Imam has drawn attention to how drug and alcohol abuse is playing a devastating role in exacerbating high levels of gender-based violence. It impairs judgment, leading to crime, and is associated with vulnerable women being trafficked and becoming involved in commercial sex trade. In the same manner that there should be harsher sentences for crimes of gender-based violence, so too must there be harsher sentences against drug-related offenses. Now, Sheikh Imam has raised the issue of the closure of these taverns and drinking dens at a particular time. This is a matter I'd like this parliament to discuss. We should remember that Jabu Baloyi in Pretoria lost his life trying to stop a drug dealer from selling drugs to a young person. Our people are fed up with seeing drug dealers operating openly with impunity, ruining their lives. And our people are so fed up that they would like all of us here to be seen to be taking serious action. Loko vanhu va vona vana va vona va dzaha nyaupe va dzaha na bluetooth leyi va yi fakaku angatini ya vona loko va yi languta va hleketa ku ri hina a yi timiselanga ku ri hi endla ku ri vana va vona va hanya kahle. Now, this is what we now need to pay attention to. The gender machinery has also been raised, and Honorable Lucas raised the issue of how the gender machinery needs to be attended to and the lack of coordination, but the lack of resources. We are hoping that with the money that we are going to make available, the gender machinery will be able to work properly and will be able to address this issue. Now, clearly, the challenges that our people face are poverty and hunger. And this is one of the key challenges that we need to address, particularly as it relates to how our people are responding to other people from other nations. As a country, we have to strike a healthy balance on the issue of migration. We need to, as I said earlier in my earlier input, we need to be so well balanced that we need to give recognition to the fact that migration is something that is always going to happen. People are always going to migrate from one country to another. And as South Africa, we have become an oasis. We've become a country that has a pull factor and attracts a number of other people. And many of them come here because they are economic refugees coming here for economic opportunities. We therefore need to debate the issue of migration in a balanced way because it has a number of aspects to it and it is quite complex. But at the same time, we do need to attract skilled immigrants and embrace them, those who come into our country legally and can contribute to our economy. What we must emphasize is that immigration control is the role of the state, and citizens should not engage in acts of vigilantism and in rounding up immigrants. We need to be quite structured in the way that we deal with this matter. Honorable Holomisa raised the issue of having a SADC accord. And yes, this is something that obviously we will need to be debating at the SADC level to have an accord that deals with issues of migration. The continent is now moving towards ensuring that there is free movement of people throughout the continent. Now that we have adopted the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement, the next step that now comes is that as goods and services move on our continent, so it must follow that people must also be able to move freely. But of course, we will want people who move freely to be documented, to be moving freely in a legal way. Honorable Holomisa also spoke about refugee camp. We are one of those countries that has never really set up a refugee camps to receive people who come as refugees to our country. It is a matter that clearly does need to be addressed. In conclusion, compatriots and honorable members, this has been a difficult and trying time for our country. We have seen our resolve tested and felt ourselves weakened. And there was a time when, as South Africans, we felt like we are truly losing this whole battle, both in terms of gender-based violence and also the challenge that we face in relation to the attacks that were being launched against South Africans as well as foreign nationals. But it is often in moments of crisis that a nation's true mettle is tested. It is often at a time like this when a nation's ability to pick itself up and move forward is really tested. We should not forget that steel, one of the strongest metals, is forged in fire. And it is in these periods that we should say, through this fire, through this difficult moment, we will be able to emerge and be stronger because we have been put through fire and we've been put through a very difficult moment. In his famous speech given in the dock on the opening of the Rivonia trial on the 20th of April 1964, the founding father of our nation, Nelson Mandela, said, "The time comes in the life of a nation where there remains two choices, to submit or to fight. We are not a nation that submits. We have come too far to surrender to intolerance, to misogyny, and to violence. That we have come together here today, united by our determination to overcome this problem, shows the strength of our resolve to surmount our challenges, and that we've been able to discuss this matter, recognizing upfront that this cuts right across party lines. This is a time for all of us as South Africans to speak with one voice and two, to be united. We now have we know we have political and policy differences, but the severity of the problem should compel all of us to speak, yes, with one voice. Let us strengthen, honorable members, our resolve to build a South Africa where neighbor lives side by side with neighbor in harmony and not in mistrust. Let us also strengthen our resolve to build a South Africa where the women of our country do not live in fear. We have come through the worst of times. Let us then go ahead and work together. In Parliament, let us set up these committees that we're talking about. Let us take forward the discussions in those committees or ad hoc committee, and let us take the discussions also as we craft legislation. But then again, let us ensure that the discussions that do cascade into our own parties, as Honorable DeLille said, let us spread it out, let us go out and talk to our people about these issues and have a genuine debate like we sought to do with Premier Makura in Ekurhuleni, where we had thousands and thousands of people and we sought to engage in debate with them. These are difficult issues to deal with, but at the same time, it is when it is difficult that all of us as leaders must get our people to engage in those debates. So let us work together so that our people may experience the best of times. Thank you very much for this debate.
Thank you very much. I now take this opportunity to thank the Honorable President for his wonderful address. That, honorable members, concludes the President's address on gender-based violence.
All right, so that's how we come out of Parliament, where the President of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, was addressing Parliament on issues related to femicide and gender-based violence, and a bit as well on attacks that we saw on foreign nationals. Let's just recap quickly what the President earlier mentioned. You also had opposition parties responding to the President's speech and a debate happening in Parliament where they were basically raising this issue of gender-based violence, and some of them coming up with recommendations and solutions to how they think the issue issue of gender-based violence can best be addressed here. So the President earlier on really indicating that funding will be made available to make a lasting difference when it comes to gender-based violence. And he also announced what he calls an emergency action plan that will be located in his office by the steering committee that was established after that summit that took place on gender-based violence last year in November. So the plan includes the prevention of gender-based violence. The second point is to strengthen the criminal justice system. And thirdly, the President saying that they're looking into some steps that could be put in place to enhance the legal and policy framework, and also to ensure that there is care, support and healing for the victims of gender-based violence. So the fifth point really was to look at measures that can be taken to improve the economic standing of women in South Africa as some become victims or they fall victim to gender-based violence due to their economic standing. So he went on to lament the poor police stations that do not cater for the needs of women. The President saying that the problem of gender-based violence, it's not a women's problem, but it's men's problems that they need to deal with. He's also promised that officials who are found to be in breach of policies on gender-based violence will be held to account, and also mentioned the issue of the criminal justice system, saying that it's got to be strengthened, and making mention as well of more sexual offences court that will be opened in the next financial year. There's about 11 more that will be established in the next financial year. The President, on the other hand, indicating that legislation will have to be changed to allow for harsher sentences where those found guilty will not be released on parole, but emphasizing on the issue of prevention, saying that there should now be methods put in place to make sure that the issue of gender-based violence is highlighted in the school's curriculum in life orientation. So he will also meet with the Minister of Higher Education to look at how the issue of gender-based violence can also be inculcated at institutions of higher learning. So after the speech, political parties had a moment to debate the speech, as I said earlier, some coming up with recommendations and what they believe could be solutions to the problems at hand, and the President also coming back to respond to the questions that were raised by political parties, basically saying that moving forward, South Africa needs to build a South Africa where women of the country do not live in fear, saying that the committees that were recommended by some political parties to be established within Parliament will also be established, and the conversation around gender-based violence shouldn't stop now. It should continue, as this is a big problem. That's what came out of Parliament this afternoon, where the President was introducing the gender-based emergency plan, looking at fighting the scourge of gender-based violence.